Learning the opening and learning opening theory is crucial in order to continue to improve. This can sometimes be very difficult due to the vast amount of information out there and very time consuming. So in this video, I'm going to show you 5 key principles and guidelines that if you follow them, you're going to get great positions and you're going to be able to win tons of games. We're also going to look at a game from Bobby Fischer in which he crushes his opponent because he failed to follow these guidelines. And we're starting right now. Before we go on to the game, let's first discuss the opening principles so that we can better understand them as the game progresses. This is to control the center, to develop our pieces, do not move the same piece twice, not to bring out the queen too early, and probably the most important one, king safety. The game was played between Byrne with the white pieces and Bobby Fischer playing with black, and Byrne opens up the game with knight to f3, a very flexible move that can transpose into just about any opening. And yes, he does not put any of his pawns in the center, but it is impossible for Fischer to prevent one of those pawns from reaching there on the next move. Fischer plays knight to f6, he's also staying very flexible and not disclosing any of his intentions. Byrne continues with c4, g6 by Fischer, he wants to put his bishop on g7 and castle as quickly as possible. Byrne continues with d4, bishop g7, the knight develops to a c3, Fischer castles, bishop to f4, and here Fischer plays d5 and we have a Grunfeld defense. Typically in this opening you develop your king side very quickly, you castle and then you start picking away at the center, and that's what Fischer is doing here. And Byrne continues with queen to e3, a move that violates the opening principles, which is to bring out the queen too early. Now, queen to b3 is part of the opening theory in this opening and is the Hungarian attack variation of the Grunfeld defense. The queen on b3 is keeping a strong eye on the square on b7, so this bishop on c8 cannot develop so easily. At the same time, it's putting a lot of pressure on the pawn on d5 since there are now 3 pieces attacking it and only 2 defending it. Fischer, not a player to go for passive development, goes pawn takes pawn, queen takes, and now the pawn on c7 is hit twice by the bishop and queen, so Fischer goes ahead and he plays c6. Byrne takes this opportunity and he plays e4, putting yet another pawn in the center, and now he has great control of all the central squares. And it is unclear what Fischer is going to do with his queenside pieces, so he goes knight b to d7 and he's eyeing knight to b6 followed by bishop to g4. Byrne in this position goes for rook to d1, a logical move and not a bad one since it's putting the rook in the same file as the queen, and if the game opens up he can have a very good position. On the other hand, I would have preferred to go bishop to e2 followed by kingside castling. Here Fischer goes knight to b6, he attacks the queen and asks the queen where she wants to go. If the queen retreats back to b3, then you can take this opportunity to play bishop to e6, attacking the queen and developing with tempo. So Byrne did not want to do this and he goes queen to c5, which is a natural square when you play this Hungarian attack variation. Fischer continues with bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the rook, and in some situations targeting the pawn on d4. Here Byrne continues with bishop to g5, violating yet another opening principle, which is not to move the same piece twice in the opening. Again, he should have gone for bishop to e2 followed by kingside castling. In this position, Fischer plays the first of many brilliant moves of the game. He goes for knight to a4, hitting the queen and hitting the knight. But I know what you're thinking, hey, this knight is not protected, how come my knight cannot capture here? Well, if you do that, if you go knight takes knight, you go knight takes on e4, you hit the queen, you hit the bishop, the queen takes on e7, and then you go queen to a5 check. Now you're hitting the knight, you're hitting this bishop with both your queen and the knight. Not to mention this rook is coming to the e-file. This is going to be a very bad game for white to play. So knight takes on a4 is not possible, so Byrne had to move his queen and he goes queen to c3. Fischer took the knight from c3, pawn took on c3, and here knight takes on e4, another brilliant move. Fischer is sacrificing his exchange on f8 in order to get to the king. Byrne, not backing down, takes on e7 with the bishop, and Fischer goes queen to b6. And Byrne continues with bishop to c4. Taking the rook with bishop takes on f8 would have been suicidal, since after you go bishop takes on f8, you're hitting the queen, this queen is gonna have to go queen to c1, and you can go ahead and play knight takes on c3 because the queen cannot take because you go bishop before pinning the queen, and now you're hitting the rook. This rook is ready to come to the e-file. It's going to be hell on wheels here for white. So Byrne anticipated this bad position and he played bishop to c4. But Fischer went ahead and he took on c3 anyway. Since queen takes on c3 runs into rook to e8, pinning the bishop, and when the queen goes back to protect, you take the knight, pawn takes, and after queen to c7, there's nothing you can do. This bishop is gonna drop, you're down a pawn, your pawn structure is a mess, and your king is still stuck in the center. So Byrne did not go for this, and after knight takes on c3, he played bishop to c5. And at first glance, this looks like a very strong move. You're attacking the queen, this queen is hitting the knight here, but Fischer had anticipated this. He knew that this king was stuck in the center, it had nowhere to go, and here he played rook f to e8 check. The king moved to f1, and in this position, Bobby Fischer played the move of the century. He goes for bishop to e6, sacrificing the queen on b6. In this moment, Byrne must have realized that all the other moves lose, so he went ahead and he took the queen anyway. But let's examine some of the other variations. If you go queen takes on c3, we can go ahead and capture the bishop thanks to the fact that pawn is pinned, because if you take, I take your queen on c3. So this move was not possible, and if you take the bishop, this leads to a beautiful checkmate after queen to b5 check, king to g1, knight e2 check, the king comes to f1, knight g3, double check with the knight and queen, the king goes here to g1 and we sacrifice our queen, rook takes, and there is a beautiful smother mate with knight to e2. So returning to the game, after bishop to e6, Byrne went ahead and he took the queen with bishop takes on b6, and Fischer took on c4 with the bishop, and this is check. The king has to go to g1, and in this situation Fischer played yet another brilliant continuation. He goes knight to e2, king f1, knight takes on d4 check with the bishop, the king goes back to g1, knight to e2 check again, king f1, and knight back to c3. And this is almost the exact position we had earlier, but now there's a pawn missing from d4, which means this bishop from g7 is protecting the knight, and after the king goes to g1, Fischer went ahead and he took the bishop now. Now the queen is hit by this rook, which is going to enter the game very quickly, and this knight is also attacking the rook. So Byrne protects the queen, goes queen to b4, attacking this bishop on c4, and Fischer goes rook to a4, attacks the queen and protects the bishop. So Byrne took a pawn for his troubles, and Fischer went ahead and gobbled up the rook that was on d1, not protected by anybody. And if you do a quick count, you can notice that there's a rook, 2 pieces, and a pawn for the sacrificed queen. And this king is still not safe, this rook is not in the game, so Byrne goes for h3, trying to give his king some space and at the same time bringing out the rook into the game. Fischer goes ahead and captures another pawn. Byrne goes king to h2 and Fischer takes another pawn. He keeps taking all the material. Byrne continues with rook to e1. He wants to trade a pair of rooks just in case that he can get some kind of perpetual check in the back rank. Fischer continues rook takes. Byrne gives an intermediate check on d8. The bishop has to retreat, and now he captures the rook on e1. Fischer continues with bishop to d5, putting pressure on the pawn on g2. Byrne plays knight to f3, knight to e4 by Fischer, and queen to b8, trying to take the pawn on b7, but Fischer was not in the mood to give any material away. He goes pawn to b5, Byrne continues with h4, trying to go for some h5, trying to soften up the king side a bit, but Fischer again was not in the mood for any of this. He plays h5 himself, not allowing this pawn to continue further, and here Byrne goes for his last trick of the game, which is to go knight to e5, taking advantage of the fact that this bishop is pinned, so if this knight gets here to d7, it can give some hope for white to save this game. Fischer, of course, unpins himself, goes king to g7, and at the same time, he's now activating his bishop to come to d6, which will attack the queen and attack the knight. So Byrne goes king to g1, but this leads to a beautiful finish after bishop to c5 check, king to f1, knight to g3 check, the king comes here, bishop check, king to d1, bishop b3 check, the king moves again, knight to e2 check, king to b1, knight c3 check, king c1, and finally rook to c2 checkmate. Hope you guys enjoyed the game. Thank you for watching. As always, stay safe, have a great day, show respect to your opponent, and see you on the next video.